November 1942. A German officer moves through the mist-filled streets of Copenhagen. He never hears the gunfire. He never sees what strikes him. One instant he is alive, the next he lies lifeless on the cobblestones. His assassin is already several streets away, the weapon concealed inside a coat sleeve. The gun that ended his life resembled nothing more than a length of industrial tubing. There was no visible trigger guard, no refined contours, no polished finish. By any conventional measure, it was the most unattractive firearm ever issued to British forces, yet it was also the most lethal clandestine weapon of the Second World War. The Welrod pistol was not designed to win battles in the traditional sense. It was created to fight another kind of war, one waged in shadows, in occupied cities, in the narrow space between a resistance fighter's coat and a collaborator's skull. It succeeded by producing a sound so extraordinarily quiet that victims often collapsed before anyone nearby realised a weapon had even been fired. In 1941, British intelligence faced a challenge that was easy to describe and nearly impossible to resolve. The Special Operations Executive, acting on orders from Winston Churchill, had been tasked with setting Europe ablaze. Agents were being inserted deep into occupied territory. Resistance cells were forming. Sabotage missions were being planned. Yet a critical hole remained in the arsenal. When an SOE operative needed to kill silently, the available methods were primitive. Knives required close physical contact. Garrots demanded strength and precise positioning. Poison was slow, unpredictable, and unreliable. What agents needed was a firearm capable of killing at close range without alerting every German soldier within hundreds of meters. Silenced weapons already existed, but they were deeply inadequate. A suppressed Sten gun reduced noise to roughly 130 decibels, about as loud as a jackhammer. It could mask the sharp crack of gunfire but was useless for truly silent killing. Suppressed pistols of the era lowered sound to around 120 decibels, still loud enough to be heard clearly across a street or through walls by anyone within 50 meters. SOE required something entirely new, a weapon quiet enough to be fired in a crowded building without attracting attention, simple enough that it could not fail at the decisive moment, and compact enough to vanish beneath clothing. On paper, the requirements bordered on impossible. Responsibility fell to a small group at the Inter-Services Research Bureau, Station 9, located in Welwyn Garden City north of London. The project was led by Major Hugh Reeves, alongside a handful of engineers whose identities remain largely obscured by classification. Rather than approaching the problem as traditional gunsmiths, they treated it as an acoustic engineering challenge. A gunshot originates from three sources. First, the explosion of propellant gases exiting the barrel. Second, the sonic crack produced when a bullet exceeds the speed of sound. Third, the mechanical noise of the weapon cycling. To achieve true silence, all three had to be addressed. The team began with the projectile. Standard 9mm parabellum ammunition travels at roughly 350 meters per second, well above the speed of sound, which is approximately 343 meters per second at sea level. Even with perfect gas suppression, such a round would always generate a sonic crack. The answer was straightforward. Continue using 9mm ammunition, but reduce the propellant charge. This lowered muzzle velocity to about 290 meters per second, subsonic and silent in flight. Next came mechanical noise. Semi-automatic pistols generate considerable sound as the slide cycles, ejecting spent casings and chambering fresh rounds. The Welrod eliminated this entirely by adopting a bolt-action design. The operator manually turned a knurled knob at the rear to extract the spent casing and load the next round. It was slow, but nearly silent. The final and most difficult problem was the propellant gases themselves. As a bullet exits a barrel, the rapidly expanding gases behind it produce the familiar explosive report of gunfire. The Welrod addressed this with an integrated suppressor that was radical in both simplicity and effectiveness. This suppressor was not an accessory, it was the weapon itself. Roughly 2/3 of the pistol's overall length consisted of a complex system of baffles and expansion chambers. When fired, the gases entered this internal maze, expanding gradually through successive chambers, cooling and slowing before finally venting harmlessly into the air. The results were remarkable. A standard 9mm pistol generates approximately 160 decibels at the muzzle, loud enough to cause immediate and permanent hearing damage. The Welrod produced roughly 73 decibels, comparable to the sound of a car door closing. At a distance of 10 meters, the report dropped further, blending almost completely into normal urban background noise. The weapon measured just 14 inches in total length. Its grip was a plain cylindrical tube wrapped in rubber for traction, housing a 6-round magazine. Later versions increased capacity to 8 rounds. The barrel extended forward, indistinguishable from a simple piece of pipe. There was no trigger guard, only a small curved trigger protruding from the underside. Sights were rudimentary, a fixed front blade and a rear notch, because the well rod was never intended for precision shooting at distance. Its effective range was about 23 meters, with optimal use at far closer distances. This was a contact weapon, meant to be pressed against a target or fired across a small room. At such ranges, accuracy was irrelevant. Silence was everything, and in that regard the well rod exceeded every expectation. Production began in late 1942. Exact figures remain classified, but estimates range from approximately 2,800 to as many as 14,000 units produced during the war. This wide discrepancy reflects the extraordinary secrecy surrounding the program. Serial numbers were deliberately scattered to obscure true production totals. Records were sparse, and many were intentionally destroyed. The well rod saw its first operational use in early 1943, when SOE agents began receiving them via clandestine supply drops throughout occupied Europe. The weapon quickly earned the trust of resistance fighters. In France, the Maquis used well rods for what they referred to as executive actions. German officers known for exceptional brutality towards civilians often died without witnesses. Collaborators who betrayed resistance networks stopped talking forever. The pistol enabled assassinations under conditions that would have been unthinkable with conventional firearms. One documented incident describes a target being killed inside a crowded Paris café. The assassin exited calmly through a room full of patrons, none of whom realized anything had occurred until the body was discovered. In Denmark, the Holger Danske resistance group relied heavily on the well rod. Their targets included Danish Nazis, Gestapo informants, and German intelligence officers. The weapon's silence made it possible to conduct operations in dense urban environments, even in daylight, situations that would have been suicidal with louder arms. In Norway, SOE operatives employed well rods during sabotage missions. Guards could be neutralized without alerting nearby patrols. The moments of confusion following a soundless killing often determined whether explosives were planted successfully or agents were captured. The psychological effect on German occupation forces was profound. Officers began to understand that silence offered no safety. The absence of gunfire did not mean the absence of threat. Informants became increasingly difficult to recruit once collaborators realized that betrayal could result in death without warning, without noise, without any opportunity to cry out. If you find this compelling, a quick subscription helps more than you might expect. Now consider how the well rod compared with what German and American engineers were developing at the same time. German suppressed weapons were largely modified versions of existing service pistols. The Walther PPK, for example, could be fitted with a screw-on suppressor that reduced sound to roughly 115 decibels. This was quieter than an unsuppressed handgun, but still unmistakably audible as gunfire. More importantly, German suppressor design focused on reducing shooter signature for snipers, not enabling assassinations in crowded environments. The Americans developed the HDM, or High Standard Model D, a suppressed .22 caliber pistol used by the Office of Strategic Services. It was notably quiet, producing around 90 decibels. However, the small caliber severely limited effectiveness. Multiple shots were often necessary to guarantee a kill, and penetration through heavy winter clothing was unreliable. By contrast, the well rod's 9mm round, even with its reduced powder charge, delivered far greater stopping power. The comparison is stark. The well rod achieved approximately 73 decibels with a 9mm projectile. The HDM reached about 90 decibels with a .22 caliber round. German suppressed pistols rarely performed better than 115 decibels. In the brutal mathematics of silent killing, the well rod stood alone. There was, however, one notable drawback. The well rod's integrated suppressor had a limited service life. The rubber wipes that sealed around each bullet as it passed through the baffle stack gradually deteriorated with